Today is Monday, October 30th, 2023. We are interviewing Robert Trauner in Marietta, Georgia, in the United States. I am the interviewer, Sherry Aviv. Today is Monday, October 30th, 2023. We are interviewing Robert Trauner in Marietta, Georgia, in the United States. I am Sherry Aviv, the interviewer. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I think we're going to start with, why don't you tell us your current name and how to spell it?
Okay, Robert Trauner, Trauner.
And what was your name at birth?
Robert Deutsch.
Can you spell Deutsch?
Deutsch.
And have you been known by any other names?
Most people call me Bob. No middle initial.
What's your birth date?
June 14, 1943.
And how old are you today?
80.
And where were you born?
I was born in Nitra, Slovakia.
Can you spell Nitra?
I've spelled both ways, N-I-T-R-A and N-I-T-R-E, mostly with an A.
Okay. And can you share a little bit about what the nearest town or region Nitra was in that you recall?
It was, when I was born, it was about the fourth largest city in Slovakia, about an hour from Bratislava, which is the capital of Slovakia. And maybe a 2 or 3 hour drive from Vienna, Austria. It's right on the border.
And I know you've done some research. What do you know about the Jewish population at that time in Nitra?
I know for sure that there were at least 6 million Jews killed from Nitra, because there's a plaque commemorating that on...
Did you mean 6 million? Or?
I'm sorry, you're right. 6,000. 6 million is the whole year, but 6,000. And I don't know what the original population was before the Holocaust. I think probably close to 15,000.
Tell me about this plaque that you talked about.
It's a memorial plaque on my synagogue that my father was the cantor in Nitra. And I think it was written or published in 1952 in honor of the 6,000 Jews from Nitra that died in the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. And we were going to talk about your father, but this is your birth father.
Yes.
And what did he do as a profession?
Well,
go ahead.
No, he started off as an opera singer, and then he got this position as the cantor for the Neolog Synagogue in Nitra, which Neolog is what we would call as Reform Synagogue today.
And what was your father's name?
Wojtek, known also as Bela, B-E-L-A, Deutsch.
And as a opera singer, cantor, did he travel and perform, or did he only perform in Nitra?
I'm not sure. The only evidence I have is this brochure where he put on a concert in 1936. I'm not sure even where it was, but he was singing the aria from Carmen, Bizet's Carmen, 1936.
Do you know when your father was born and where?
It was I don't know exactly. I think it must have been in Hungary, 1907, sometime in 1907, 1906 in Hungary.
And do you know how he got his way to how did he get to Nitra? Did he go somewhere in between first, or?
I don't know.
What did his father do?
I know nothing about his father.
Okay.
Nothing at all. And until recently, I didn't even know he had a brother. And we have a picture of his brother's wife, and his mother, in a picture that we have right in front of where my parents used to live in Nitra.
How did you learn that he had a brother?
I just learned it from looking at I probably knew about it before, but it brought back my recollection. This picture, which indicated who the persons were in the picture, was being held by my grandmother, and my father was there, and then his brother and his wife, and Mr. Kraus, who I somehow is a relative, but he's also in the picture.
Did his brother survive the war?
No.
So your father came from Hungary,
Yes.
made his way eventually to Nitra, and in Nitra, tell us then about your mother. What was her name?
Okay, her name was Gertrude, also known as Gertie Trauner. And she was the daughter of Adele and Mortko Trauner. Mortko passed away in 1926, and the reason I know that is because we have a picture of his tombstone. So he passed away well before the Holocaust actually came about.
And what was your grandmother's name?
Adele Trauner, A-D-E-L-E, Adele.
And did she go by another name?
Adela, maybe. A lot of times in these European countries, there's an A added, sometimes an OVA. Adela probably was the way she was known back then.
So how did your mother and her family lived in Nitra before they married or after?
My mother and my maternal uncle Ben were actually living in Vienna, where my grandmother had a kosher restaurant. So they grew up in Vienna. And then when Gertrude married Bella, I'm not sure if the wedding was, I think the wedding was in Nitra, but somehow they got married in 1937 and they moved to Nitra, where he took his position as cantor in the synagogue.
So let's talk a little bit more about your mother. So when was she born?
I believe she was born in 1912.
And so she
in Vienna.
In Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a brother. What was his name?
Ben Trauner.
And so they lived in Vienna, and what was their age differences? When was Ben born?
I think Ben was born also in 1907. So he was, I think, 5 years older.
And were they close?
As far as I know, very close, yes. We have many letters written between Ben, I think they were written in German, and his sister. Hundreds of letters after Ben emigrated to this country.
Mm-hmm. So your parents get married, moved to Nitra. Who else moved with them to Nitra?
Well, not initially, but after the Anschluss, my grandmother was running a kosher restaurant. It was impossible to run a restaurant, any kind of Jewish business. And I've heard stories where she secretly crossed the Danube and wound up with her daughter and son-in-law. But I would say she moved there in the late 30s to Nitra.
So the family of Adela, because your grandfather had passed away, and Ben and your mother, Gertie, were in Vienna. Your grandmother gets to Nitra. What did your Uncle Ben do at that time?
He was working for a clothing manufacturer in Vienna. Apparently he was there since he was 25 years old. And then because of the Anschluss, the business shut down, and he was not able, the business wasn't able to survive and had to close. And he decided to move to the United States, and he had relatives already in the United States. I don't know how far back they go, maybe as far back as the early 1900s. And then his uncle, Abraham, sponsored him. And he also, I guess at that time, took a boat, late 38, and he arrived in this country in early 39.
How old was Ben when he decided to come to the United States?
I would think he was in his early 31, maybe. No, I'm sorry, we're not that old. Let's see, 1907. Yeah, probably that early 30s, yes.
So here Ben is coming to the United States. You mentioned the Nazi regime is moving in.
Mhm.
What about your mother and father and grandmother? Did they also try to come to the United States?
No, there was no desire, at least initially. Now, as it got worse and worse in Austria and Nitra, they tried to get visas. At least my grandmother did. I don't know about Bella, because he was fairly ensconced as the canner and was making a nice living relatively. And but I know Ben trying to try to get his mother out from Austria and then Slovakia, but was unable to get a visa for her.
Do you know if your father Bella served in the German army and at all in World War One?
I don't think so. It wouldn't have been the German army. It was Hungary. I don't know where Hungary was back then or not, but I think it's possible his father served in World War One somewhere.
Mhm.
I don't think Mortko served in the service. I have no knowledge of that. Of course, he passed away in 1926.
So, did did Ben survive the war, coming to the United States?
Well, after he came to the United States, he was married Frances Trauner, my adoptive mother, who was from the Bronx. Got married in March of 1942, and then within 6 months after that, he enlisted in the Army. At that point, he was about 35 years old, maybe almost twice as old as most of the young recruits. I don't think he was drafted. I think he joined basically to try to find his sister and his mother and fight the Nazis.
So we have your parents are in Nitra and your Uncle Ben is in the United States. And can you talk about any of their correspondence? You know, what did he know was going on with them?
Well, again, we have many letters written, I think, in German between Ben and his sister. After the war, it became more, this was like between 1930 and 1939 and 1942. After that, it was difficult corresponding, although we did find some correspondence that was actually written in code from the American Red Cross, where somehow my mother informed Ben that she was pregnant and expecting a child.
And that child was who?
That was me, yes.
And at that point, what did Ben do to try to help them escape if possible?
Well, at least with regard to his mother, I know he tried to get visas and try to get them out, but at that point, it was impossible to get out. There was a time, I guess, in the late 30s, before the war, where Germany expelled everybody from Germany, and there were no restrictions. But after the war started, of course, it was impossible.
So it's your parents are in Nitra,
Yep.
and can you tell us about the different ways of deportation? You had other family members and other things. Can you talk about what Nitra was like at that time?
Well, I can get into why I was even born. Is that all right to get into that?
Sure.
Because I wanted to find out why I was even born, because Slovakia was probably the most fascist country besides Germany. And they had this group called the Hlinka Guards, which were basically the Slovakian SS. And deportation started from Slovakia. It was the first country after Germany that actually started deportations to the concentration camps. And my father's cousin, or second cousin, Imre Gansi, who also lived in Nitra, was one of the first deported, I think 1941, 42, to the concentration camps. He was about 17 years of age. And you want me to get into the history of my research and all that at this point, or maybe later?
At this point, your cousin?
My cousin's gone in 1942 before I was.
Your parents are not, and why were your parents not deported at that time?
Okay. Well, I did a lot of research about this because I was curious. I mean, I knew I was a hidden child. Maybe we can get into that later between my adoptive parents. Well, I didn't know much about it. But I did a lot of research at Emory University Library. That was before they had the internet. I buried myself in the stacks for a long time, took notes, made copies. But after the deportations of 1942, there was a lull between 1942 and 1944. And that's when I was born in 1943. So my research reflected that this individual named Dieter Wizliciny, who was an adjunct for Adolf Eichmann and was in charge of Slovakia, he was apparently bribed $50,000 equivalent of Corona, whatever the exchange was, but about $1 million in today's money. So he was bribed. That helped. And also there was a working group formed between the Orthodox Jews and the Neolog Jews who were at odds with each other at that time because of the difference in their beliefs, Jewish religion. They formed a working group, and there's some individuals, I can name their name. Should I do that? Or am I getting into too much history?
So this working group protected?
Well, the working group set up a truce. I'll mention that the primary leaders were Jerzy Fleischmann and Michael Weissmandl, who was the son-in-law of one of the major Orthodox rabbis in Europe. His name was Rabbi Unger. And they created this working group where they helped set up work camps to keep the deportations from continuing, plus the bribe. And they worked together until 1944. And what happened in 1944 is there was an uprising in Slovakia based upon the fact that the Russians were coming from the east, and the American allies had already, I guess, reached France at Normandy. And some of these partisans felt that they could, at that point, try to take over the local government. But that was turned down, that uprising was turned down. And that's when the Nazis came in and dictated no more truce, and the deportation started again in September of 1944. So that's the date, deportations.
So what happens is your cousin is deported much earlier,
Yes.
and your family, your parents with your grandmother, were safe for a while. Do you know what kind of living conditions they were under? How did they earn a living? How did they get food? Do you have any knowledge from others about that?
Well, Slovakia instituted the Jewish codes is what they refer to, which were similar to the Nuremberg laws that were instituted in the mid-30s in Germany, where you couldn't have a business, the civil rights were abrogated, and of course they allowed the Jewish religion to continue. Of course, my father was a cantor, and there were no other jobs available outside of, I guess, religious-related jobs because of the Jewish codes.
Do you know if they still were able to have services in that community?
I think so. I don't know for a fact, but I think they continue to have services.
So here, your parents are still there, your mother Gertie, and your cousin is deported. And what does she do as he is leaving?
Well, I was told that they were very close. I think they were cousins also. And as he was leaving, she made a bundle of stuff for him to take and apparently threw it over the fence. And Emory, always spoke highly of that and how much he was grateful. And perhaps some of the other citizens did similar as they were being taken away.
And what fence was this? What was it a fence of? What was it?
I don't know whether it was a high-rise fence or just a little fence, but he did mention that to me.
So he was in some kind of internment camp?
I think he was on the way. It was probably a separation on the way to the train station, where she maybe said goodbye and was able to toss him some stuff.
So let's talk a little bit more about your parents. Do you know if they celebrated holidays, especially your from your grandmother, if you heard, were they religious at all?
I would think they celebrated holidays. I don't know that as a fact. The Neolog, Judaism part of Neolog, was it was liberal, modern, but it wasn't totally opposite. I mean, they had holidays. I think the main difference was it was almost like the building itself was built in a Gothic Moorish style as opposed to an Orthodox synagogue. The women did sit separately, but they sat upstairs. And there was an organ. And Bela was also known as an organista. If you see some writings about him as an organista, not just a cantor. So obviously he played the organ. And I'm sure they could continue having their services for that 2-year period where there was a lull in deportations.
So here we are. It's 1943. You're born.
Mm-hmm.
Your parents and you and your grandmother, Adele, are in Nitra. Your uncle Ben is in the U.S. and joins the Army. Deportations begin. Tell us about September 1944.
Yes, that's when the deportation started because of the fact that the Nazis came in and dispensed of the lull, so to speak. And my parents and my grandmother were ordered to gather their belongings and go to the train station for relocation. So it was more a voluntary trip as opposed to like Anne Frank when they came in and ripped her out of the house. They were just told to go to the train station. And by this time, most people knew what was happening, September of 1944. And on the way to the train station, this Gentile individual, and I'm still unsure whether it was an acquaintance or just somebody standing there watching them leave, told my parents that they're killing all the children. Let me keep your child. Whether they had time to stop and arrange some things, they must have, because my mother gave a letter to this woman indicating that her brother was in the United States, and they knew that the Allies had already come to Western Europe. Here's a letter explaining that he'll compensate you to the extent of 500 coronas if he survives the war, if we don't come back. So she had this letter, and at that point, I was left with this lady. Joseph Dobrotina was her name, Gentile lady. And they went on to the train station to go to, I think, Auschwitz, directly to Auschwitz.
The three that went on were your grandmother and
right,
your parents.
My parents.
How old were you at that time?
I was about 1 year and 3 months old. September 44, so I was born June of 43.
And did you have any special toy or anything from that time period from your parents?
I think there was a homemade stuffed animal that my grandmother made, and we may still have it somewhere, but you could see the patchwork of little pieces of cloth that she put together and stuffed. That was the name of that toy was Schmutzum. You know what Schmutzum means?
And you still have it today?
I think we had it up till years ago, and I think it totally fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
We may still have it hidden away somewhere, but that was my toy.
So when you think back as to the decision your parents had to make, what do you think about? What do you imagine?
Yeah. Well, it's obviously difficult, very difficult to imagine. But they knew what was happening. They knew there was no chance of at least me surviving, because young children were the first to be tossed into the ovens. So it was difficult, and I'm sure extremely moving, but maybe not that difficult, because they knew that I had a better chance of surviving than they did.
So of the three that went to Auschwitz,
yes,
what happened to each of them?
Well, as I understand it, my mother there was two lines, and my grandmother went to one line, and my mother went to another line, and I believe that was the line that was individuals were immediately killed. And my grandmother went to the line to the left, let's say, and she was able to survive. And we think that was because she had some knowledge of cooking. She ran a kosher restaurant. And she was not young at that time, but she was able to survive initially. As far as Bella, I believe he went maybe to a different line, but I believe he survived maybe 6 months or longer, but he died from disease, I believe, or was cremated. I don't. He didn't last obviously until the end of the war.
So, of the three, the oldest, your
Yes.
grandmother survives.
Right.
And we'll talk more about her later, but did she recount any story to you about that moment when your parents gave you to this Gentile woman?
She was obviously not able to speak English, so when she came to this country, she was not able to communicate with me. And she may have in either Yiddish or Slovak, but I have no recollection of that. I mean, I was 3.5 years old, so I must have known. I spoke Slovak for sure, but I don't recall any conversations at all with Grandma.
So here you are, handed over to this woman. She must have had neighbors, relatives. Who did she say you were?
It is a little unusual. She had no children, and suddenly to appear out of nowhere, I understand it was likely that I was supposedly a nephew, and something was wrong with his parents, but she wound up taking care of him, and so I was raised by her. And I don't know anything about Mr. Dobertina, but I assume there was a Mr. Dobertina. But of course, her name appears on everything that we have, Mrs. Joseph Dobertini. That's the way they identified ladies, and Mrs., not their own name. I don't know what her first name was, but she was known as Mrs. Joseph Dobertina. And she kept me for at least almost a year as her nephew.
Do you remember, I know you were very young, but do you remember the yard or a sense of the place?
No, but I think they may have been a farm like chickens and maybe a cow. I don't know. I've seen pictures, and my nickname was Pipko, which means little chicken.
Can you spell it?
Pipko, Pipko,
Okay.
and I learned that from Emory. They called me Pipko, and there may have been a German Shepherd dog there too. Some recollection about that, but I don't know if I ever played with any other children. I have no recollection, but I was told by everybody just to be very careful. Don't do anything you would ordinarily do, maybe outside, and because they were concerned that I might be identified as a Jewish child.
So, 1943, you're born. It's a lull. Did your parents perform the traditional rites of a Jewish son in terms of circumcision and all of that?
Of course, yeah.
So you could easily be identified if someone
Yes.
found you.
Right.
Did you know if anyone told you or you recall calling Mrs. Dobertina any special name?
No, I have no recollection about her at all.
So here you are, and the war ends, and you are young and all of that. Do you have any recollection from her or anyone about any troops coming in and liberating the area?
No.
Do you know what army came in to liberate Nitra?
I think it was the Russian army. It came from the east.
Let's talk a little bit about other family members. So your parents are murdered in Auschwitz. Your grandmother, you said, survived. Your uncle is in there. Your cousin, did Emery survive?
Yes.
Were there other relatives that survived the war?
Not that I know of. I mean, they have been, I think that's it. That's just the principal parties you mentioned. Yeah.
So here you are, just under a little over 2 maybe,
Mhm.
and Adela survives the war. What does she do?
Well, I understand she had a very difficult time getting back to Nitra. Um, she knew that her daughter, son-in-law were dead. I assume she knew, was hoping that I was still somewhere back there with this lady. But she was very, very sick and she barely survived. I mean, it was difficult getting back. I'm not sure if he took trains or walked a great deal. But she gets back to Nitra. And at that point, there were letters written by Frances Trauner, my adoptive mother, to Adele. They must have known. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if they knew she survived, but she wrote letters, and my grandmother got these letters. It may have been after initially what was going on, but she knew that Ben was in the army and heard he was in Germany, but thought mistakenly that somehow he was caught up by the Germans and maybe died also. She was terribly upset about that and actually wanted to die, didn't want to live. So
So, and she, did she live alone? Did she live with any relatives of the
she must,
family?
I'm not sure exactly. She was in the hospital for a long time, for maybe as much as a month before she was taken by a relative, distant cousin. Um, but she was sure that Ben was dead also and didn't want to live. In fact, she asked the doctor for poison, that she wanted to die. She didn't want to live anymore. So obviously she didn't know that I was still alive. There was that couple months period where she couldn't even try to find me.
Take a break. How you doing?
Doing good.
So let's talk about Ben.
Okay.
So at this point, Ben's in the army. He's in Europe. While he's in Europe, while he's in the army, he's married to Frances. Why don't you talk about their relationship while he's in the army?
Okay. Well, they got married in March of 1942. And in I think the Bronx or Brooklyn, somewhere in this country. And I think almost immediately upon the marriage, he knew he was going to join the army soon. Um, in fact, he did join the army, and it took like 6 months to go through basic training and be prepared to actually serve overseas. And during this time, he did start a business with his brother-in-law, Frances's sister's husband. Herb Orentlik was his name. So the business had just started when they got married, and here he goes off to the war, and he is trying to help. Frances was involved with the business with Herb, and almost as soon as he left, he starts writing letters and took numerous leaves from the army to try to help the business before he went overseas. And we have hundreds of letters that are written between Ben and Frances and back and forth, trying to help her and Herb run the business. It was a textile manufacturing company in Yonkers, New York. And it was difficult in the beginning. Business wasn't great during the war. And he was worried about the business and trying to keep it going before when he would return to this country. But we do again have a lot of letters back and forth with small details about the number of machines these ladies needed for sewing and things like that, and spending money that they didn't have.
And there were letters also. What about his quest to find his family and letters about that between him and Frances?
Well, I think after Normandy and he was in France, he would write letters to Francis about daily life, which it was very difficult for him because, again, he was an older soldier. He was in his mid-30s. He had rheumatism, he had arthritis, and it was difficult for him sleeping on the ground. And he just hated the army, just hated it. But he was able, actually, he was a tailor. That was his background. He was able to do some tailoring for the soldiers. And he was also spoke fluent German. So I think initially he was going to be a translator if required. But Francis kept saying, you know, when are you going to get back? When are you going to get back? But obviously he said, well, I got to find my sister and my brother-in-law. And again, I think a little later on in early 44, he knew that there was a baby. He didn't know initially because he left, I think, in March of 1943. He did know that she was pregnant. So I guess when he finally got to Nitra, took him, well, basically the war was over in 1945, May of 1945.
And so at that time, he's in the army and the war is over. And where is he in Europe?
Yeah, he's in Germany.
And is he part of the liberation unit?
Now, he was, I think there was some liberation by individuals of Patton's Third Army, General Patton. He was in Patton's Third Army, but he was not one of the individuals that actually liberated some of the camps. But he knew at that point that he had to try, I don't think he knew until, I believe there was a Red Cross letter, which I don't have, but it was from Dr. Benish or Mr. Benish saying, Gertie and Bella, death. That was, he didn't speak very good English, death. There is a baby, come soon. And that was sent to headquarters in the United States. You couldn't just write directly to where the soldiers were. So at that point, I guess he knew that he had to go find the baby.
So what was that like? He's in the American zone, and earlier you mentioned you were in Nitra was in the Russian zone.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
It was a struggle. It took him months and months to get leaves of absence. And at the same time, Frances wants him to come home, at least until she found out there was a baby, and then she totally changed. But she tried to get him back a lot quicker, and it literally took him months to be able to travel through Germany to Czechoslovakia and actually find out what happened. And once he got to Nitra, I think the Joint Distribution Committee, Jewish Joint Distribution, had published the name of the survivors. And of course, he writes his wife, Frances, that his sister and brother-in-law are dead. Adele is alive.
Did he not know if his mother was alive at that point or not when he saw her name?
I think, well, he knew, but I don't know where that letter was published. It may not have been in Nitra. It may have been some other place, because it then took him a long time to actually get to Nitra, where he found his mother. And
so the war ends in May 1945.
Yes.
He gets there towards the end of the year to find you. And
yeah.
What does he do first when he gets there? Where does he go?
Where does he go? Well, he goes to the hospital and I guess tries to hunt up his relatives, any distant relatives that may have survived. And there were some. Dr. Benish, who was a doctor married to a Gentile lady, and he had actually hidden in the mountains, and after the war came back. So he found him and maybe some other relatives. And then, of course, I guess, I'm not sure if Adele told him or he had this actual letter with Miss Dobrotina's address on there. But he immediately, as soon as he could, he went to her.
How did he find your grandmother, his mother?
Well, I think her name was probably published, and I believe she was in a hospital. Now, exactly where, whether it was in Nitra or somewhere else in Slovakia, I don't know.
So your grandmother, you shared, was giving up on life,
mm-hmm.
knew about you. What did she before Ben arrived and had planned for your future?
I don't know. But she obviously knew where I was. So I believe she must have told him exactly where I was because Ben went there immediately.
And did this Dr. Benz have any role in what your future could be?
Well, after he found me, I think eventually we stayed, grandmother and I stayed with Dr. Benish for a good period of time while Ben was trying to get visas for us. And at one point, it was so difficult to get visas, I think Dr. Benish offered to keep me as his own child.
So your uncle comes there, finds Adela, learns you're still there. Can you share again how you think he found out where you lived, or?
He must have found out from my grandmother because she knew exactly. I don't know if she knew the street, but she knew the lady that took me. So she must have known the address. And I'm sure she told Ben the address where Mrs. Dobertino lived.
Did your uncle ever tell you whether the lady was willing to give you up or about paying her? You mentioned earlier about this.
He never mentioned any conversations that he had. I don't think she insisted or tried to create a problem and try to keep me. I don't think that occurred. I think it was fairly easy as long as she got her money. But she did get paid based upon this letter that my mother had given her.
How did he get the money? Was it a lot of money in those days?
That was a lot of money. The total was it was 50,000, I think, Corona, or 50 Corona, I'm not sure, the equivalent of $500, which at that time was about $10,000 in today's money. So he gave her $250 immediately, and apparently told her she could get the rest, but they had to sell a piano that Gertie had. She loved to play the piano, so they sold the piano, and this lady got the $500.
Where were your parents' possessions when they had to evacuate? Who took care of them?
I don't know. They may have still been at the apartment, which, by the way, was the headquarters for the Slovak government. They had taken over that apartment.
So your uncle finds you, finds his mother. Your grandmother now is revived, Ben's alive.
She's happy, yes.
What happens next? What does Ben try to do?
Well, based upon the letters back and forth between Frances and Ben, he devoted an awful lot of time to try to get visas for both me and his mother. And it took months and months, and he couldn't stay over there. I mean, he did stay an inordinately long time, a couple months, but eventually he had to come back home.
Home to the
United States. But he continued letters, determined from letters, that he was trying to get. And this was actually even before he came back. It must have been a couple of months, because there are a lot of letters from Frances to Ben telling him to go to Switzerland, do anything, and call your congressman, call the president, General Eisenhower, get them home, because other people or family members are coming home. But it was a real struggle, and I think that was also based upon the anti-Semitic feelings of the Secretary of State, which was well known back then. It was very, very difficult to get visas, and it took well over a year for the visas to come for my grandmother, who was the main person, and that was like a supplement visa.
And there was no paperwork to prove who you were, birth certificate?
No, there were birth certificates. She was actually appointed my guardian, I think in Nitra, or was it, I don't remember. It was in Nitra, the United States, but I had to have a guardian. I was not even 3 years old. So, I did have a passport, birth certificate.
Did they create the passport so you could travel?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any sense of what was going on? You go from Mrs. Dovethina to your uncle to this doctor you're staying with.
Mm.
Did you have any sense of who all these people were? What was,
Not that I recall. I wish I did.
so your uncle, what did he want to do with you when you and your grandmother would come to the United States? What did he and Frances talk about?
Well, there was talk about adoption and how that would be accomplished as quickly as possible. They perhaps thought, could it be done while I was still over in Slovakia? Not. But it wasn't done until I think 1948 in New York when they adopted.
Ben is there. He's still in the army.
Mm-hmm.
He stays very long. They come back and forth. So when did you finally, you and your grandmother, make your way to the United States? In what year and month?
Well, I think it actually started maybe in August, September of 1946, where I remember saying there's a letter written from the Department of Justice to Ben indicating that there were visas being prepared and they would enable us to leave. This was August of 46. And then I'm sure Ben spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get us back as quickly as possible and had to buy tickets, airplane tickets, and finally it was all done in the next 2-3 months that we took the train, I believe, from Nitra to Prague, and there's some indication that we flew on KLM Airlines from Prague to Amsterdam, and from Amsterdam to Idlewild in New York. So we left December 31st, 1946, and arrived in the United States New Year's Day, 1947.
And so really a year and a half almost after the war ended. You were 3.5?
3.5.
Yeah. And did your uncle come back to travel with you and your grandmother to the United States?
No. He met us, I think I may remember this. He and his partner, Herbert Rentlick, met us at the airport. Because I remember I got some kind of toy. I don't remember what it was, but I remember them meeting me at Idlewild, formerly JFK Airport. So I'm starting to get a little more recollection, I guess. The first couple months it was cold. I remember it was real cold.
And did you remember anything about the airplane? Was it a smooth ride? Did you anything?
No, but I did. I can't find it right now, but there was a manifest of the seating chart. Couldn't have been that big a plane, or maybe it was just the section that we were in, about 20 seats. So it shows Master Deutsch on one side and Adele Trauner sitting next to her. And I think I have that somewhere, which I can maybe find one day. But I have an awful lot of documents and paperwork that I'm going through.
I know you keep referencing these letters, so I'm going to go forward in time just for a little bit and then I'll go back. So at some point in 1991, when did you learn about all these letters?
Right.
And then we'll go back in
Okay.
time later.
Well, after Frances passed away,
In
91. And Ben passed away in 1974. He had very bad health, high blood pressure, bad heart, very sick. After she passed away, of course, going through all of her stuff, I find all of these letters, hundreds, I don't think thousands of letters, but hundreds of letters and pictures and paraphernalia. So I said, oh, I knew I was a hidden child, but we didn't talk about it very much. In fact, Ben and Frances sort of suggested there's no reason that I even discuss it with any of my friends. It's nobody's business.
So before she died, did you even know that these letters existed?
I believe I did. I knew there was a lot of letters, yeah.
Did you ever look at them before she
No.
died?
No. These letters, I mean, they went from Atlanta. They originally lived in Atlanta, and eventually to Florida, where my mother had a condominium. Then she was in the Jewish home for a couple of years, so it all came back to Atlanta. And at that point, I must have retrieved all those documents when she moved into the Jewish home because she had no residence here in Atlanta.
And so, did these letters tell your story, the details that had not been spoken before?
Well, I mean, before this, I had already met Imre Ganzi and spoken to him, and he tried to really update me on most of what happened. So I knew about that. But I found the letters very interesting, back and forth. You could see Ben's letter and Francis's reply chronologically. And it was just interesting over a period of a year reading these letters.
So, one thing you've referenced when you talked about these letters back and forth. So, here you are, your uncle finds you, brings you to the United States with your grandmother. And how soon thereafter were you adopted by Ben and his wife, Frances?
In 1948, so it was about a year.
And your whole life, did you, I mean, you viewed them as your parents?
Oh, yes. Yeah, but it's interesting. I didn't become a citizen of this country. I don't understand until I was 19 years old, or when I was naturalized in Mineola, New York. But I've always considered them my parents, sure.
So here you are, you're adopted. There's just 3.5. At what point or age did they share that Ben was not only father but uncle, or that you were adopted, or anything about their relationship to your parents?
I don't recall the beginning of the conversation, exactly what they said. I really have no recollection of that.
But as you got older, when did you learn you were a hidden child?
I must have known as a teenager, but not the details. I didn't think there were that many hidden children before, by the way. Do you want me to get into the gathering of hidden children? Maybe later, but...
So at this point, you kind of told as a teenager, before you said that, did you talk about it much with your parents? Did they tell you anything about your birth parents?
No.
You have pictures of your birth parents.
Yes.
How did you get them?
They were included in my mother's portfolio, so to speak.
Your mother, Frances.
Frances. I don't, whether we had any, I think we may have had other pictures, these small little pictures we have of myself in Nitra with my mother and grandmother and other relatives. I may have had those pictures in my possession before, some of those pictures.
So as a young man or a teenager, did you search out who your birth parents were, or it was like, that's the past, not the present?
I think so. But again, during this time, Emery and Ben, they told me about my father being a cantor, and I'm sure I must have heard the story of what happened.
So when you come to the United States, you become an American?
Yeah, but not a citizen.
Go to school.
Yeah.
You're adopted, not a citizen till much later. How did your need to become a citizen start? Was it with registration for the Army, or how did you?
I don't know why it took so long, and if you had to be an actual adult, maybe it's a requirement that you have to be 18 years of age. But so I was 19, I was already in college then. So I guess they felt that was the time I should become a citizen. Seems a little unusual.
And what did you learn at that time through that process?
What did I learn?
Did you learn more about your birth parents, or?
No.
What was it like to become a citizen? Do you remember taking the oath and being?
Yeah, I remember all that, but quite honestly, I mean, I felt like an American citizen from day one. Didn't seem different. Suddenly I'm a citizen. But I know I had to study and answer some questions, and there was a group of people that we were sworn in together with. And I know it happens every day in this country, but
And before you became a citizen, what did you have to do on an annual basis? Was there a registration?
no, nothing.
Um, so you become a citizen, you're here, and we'll talk about life between then. At what point did you want to start researching hidden children? How old were you and what motivated you?
I think that was in the early 90s when I discovered there was an advertisement for a gathering of hidden children in New York. I actually saw that advertisement a year or two before. And at that point, I said, I didn't realize they would have a gathering of hidden children, whether that many hidden children, even that, you would have a gathering of so many people. And we didn't go to the first one, Bobby and I, but I think we went to the second or third one in I believe, Miami, the gathering. And that's when I really started to try to find somebody who maybe knew Bella, remembered Bella and my parents, and started doing a lot of research after that.
When did you embrace or accept that you were a hidden child since you had this new life in America? When did you start to think that way as a hidden child?
Never affected me at all. But well, let's put it this way, the whole experience of being hidden and told what to do and what not to do, I think initially formed my personality and affected me personally, because I was always an introvert. I wasn't an extrovert. We used to sit alphabetically in elementary school, and the name Trauner, I was sort of at the back anyway. And that always followed me my whole life. I was very shy in high school. Never went out, never dated anybody in high school. And I had friends, boyfriends, but no girlfriends. But, it still shapes my personality to a certain extent.
Did you and your now father, Ben, when did Emery come back into the family? How old were you? Did you know of him? When did he become part of the family again?
Well, I guess he became part of the family as soon as, I'm sure Ben found him when he was over there also. And when he came to this country, and even beforehand, Ben must have supported him to a certain extent, given him money to live on, to go to school or whatever, and did the same thing to his daughter, gave her money, and felt very close to him. And I think a lot of this was done without Frances's knowledge, because she was somewhat jealous. I mean, they didn't have that much money, but he would take whatever it needed, to get money to Emery over the, I don't know for sure how much, but a lot. And he treated Emery like a son. And I know they were very close. I'm trying to remember, I know one time we traveled to Queens, because I lived in Queens for a while, and I believe Ben and Frances and I got together with Emery and his family. Must have been in the early 70s, maybe late 60s.
Well, Emery, your grandmother, you and Ben were the...
Well, I think my grandmother probably would have been passed by then. I think she died in the 50s.
So Emery comes into your life, he's family.
Mm-hmm.
At what age did he try to talk to you about your past?
Mm-hmm.
How did you?
I think whenever the first time I remember, I believe Bobby and I went to visit him in New York once too, without Ben.
So you were married?
We were married, and then there was a conference in San Diego, bankruptcy conference, and I knew he was living in San Diego, so I made plans in advance to meet with him. and he told me a lot. In fact, he prepared what are these little tapes? What do you call those? You remember those tapes? What do they call those?
Cassette tapes.
Little cassette tapes. Yeah, he told me basically the whole story, not in that much detail, on a cassette tape, which I can't.
His story and your parents.
Yeah, of everything that he. And we're not talking about days and days, like an oral testimony, but maybe an hour or so. And I can't find the tape, but there is a tape. But I know a lot more, much more than what he told me at that time. But
is that what inspired you to do the research in Emory to learn more?
I think that helped, sure. I mean, my main reason was just, again, trying to figure out why I was even born after learning about the Holocaust as a young child and the problems in Europe and in the 40s.
So you're in high school when you learn about the Holocaust and
Yeah.
realize you're a hidden child. How did it make you feel?
I don't recall anything like that during high school. I don't believe there was any cognition or whatever in high school concerning that.
So when your grandmother and you come over, you have that little toy doll, get something here at the airport.
Panda.
Did your grandmother bring anything from the homeland?
Well, she had nothing.
She still had anything left?
She had nothing. But she brought herself, and it's interesting, she didn't speak English. And I'm sure she spoke Yiddish and Slovak and German. So I'm sure she spoke to me, but Frances wanted to Americanize me immediately. And I don't know, I'm sure that upset my grandmother and upset Ben a lot. But I heard that she suggested that maybe try not to speak to Robert in Slovak, try English, but she didn't know English. And I doubt she might have learned a little English over the next 5 years she was alive.
Other than the doll, did Ben or anyone else in Emory have any physical memento object or pictures?
We had pictures, of course, a lot of pictures. And they were taken mostly before the war.
And I didn't know if you still had anything from your mother or your father, whether it was a necklace they saved or a kiddish cup or.
No, because they would have had nothing. Whatever they took with them to the concentration camp, that's all they had, and that's long gone.
I thought maybe where the piano was stored there.
I'm not, I think the piano must have been, like, it may have been stored somewhere or still at the old apartment, but that's really all that was remaining. Now, I believe, I've heard this rumor story that when Adele left Vienna to go to Nitra, she didn't take anything with her because you weren't allowed to take anything. If you got caught, you could be in prison. Supposedly she had some very nice jewelry and left it with a lady in Vienna. I remember that. And Ben trying to go back and contact this lady, but needless to say, there was nothing. I don't know if he never contacted these individuals or it was long gone, but that's about the only recollection I have of prior possessions that anybody had.
So you grew up in a loving household, Ben and Frances, American, go to high school, have a full life here. How did you meet your wife?
Blind date in Atlanta, Georgia. She's from Brooklyn, and of course I'm from the north, so we met down here. And been married just 50 years last December.
So what did you tell her about your upbringing? People talk about where are you from. What did you tell her?
Well, I think I was making up for my lack of dating in high school. And went out with a lot of Jewish ladies, but I don't think I ever mentioned this to anybody, but I guess I mentioned it to her. And she was quite impressed that I mentioned it to her, that I shared the story, what I knew at that point with her. So that must have been a sign, right? But I told her the story, and before we were married, and yeah, she's been following me in my journey and doing all this stuff, and she finds it fascinating, like most people do.
So you're now married. Bobby knows your story,
Mm-hmm.
and you start your travels. Tell about the story you shared. That did you ever go back to Nitra, and who did you
Sure.
go with? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this was, I guess, in the late 90s. And I knew at that point Emery had moved. I guess he moved from Queens to San Diego and then back to Haifa, basically for the health care, something that he didn't have to pay for and was guaranteed health care in Israel. And I was in touch with Emery by email and told him that we wanted to go back because I couldn't do it without him. I wanted to go back and try to find the lady that hid me. And he
So
said,
you were 53, 50.
it was, let's say 1997, so what was I?
56.
50, in my 50s.
First time back.
First time back. And he said, okay, why don't you come spend a couple days here with Rose, his wife. She was very sick at that point. She could not travel, but come visit Rose for a couple days. And we did. We flew to Haifa, rented a, I think he may have picked me up because he was still driving at that point. So he picked me up from the Ben Gurion airport, drove to Haifa. We stayed, he had a very small little co-op. So we stayed at one of the hotels in Haifa and spent some time with Rose. And she's telling me all these stories about how she remembered me as a little child. In fact, they called me Pitko. And that she told me, she said, when I went to the bathroom or something, I would tell Rose, I said, Rose, don't look at me, don't watch me. And she said, yes, that's what you were told as a hidden child. So we spent some very nice time with her. Then we flew from Tel Aviv to Vienna and rented a car. And I know it's very funny. It was interesting because the morning we were taking the car out, it was a diesel Mercedes. So we picked the car up from the rental, and the smoke is billowing out the back. It's going boom, 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 boom. I said, this car is not going to be able to get to Nitra, could barely get out of Vienna. So we took it back, and sure enough, the person that had had it beforehand put regular gas in. It was a diesel. So they apologized. It cost us 4 or 5 hours. We finally got on the road. And I remember crossing the border from Austria to Slovakia. And at that point, of course, the Russians still had an influence there. And there were these guards that were there wearing these heavy coats. It was pretty cold when we were there. And it was sort of nerve-wracking for me. I mean, it really felt a little uncomfortable because you drive up there, give them the passport, American passport, and they look. And I remember, I think they spoke English. He said, "You bought Slovakia?" And looking very suspicious at me. And we were quite nervous about the whole thing. And finally got through okay, and we're glad we got through the border. And then we spent a couple days traveling around, went to Prague, went to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. And Emery would show us around. And then
And he still speaks.
he speaks everything. He speaks everything. Hebrew, Yiddish, Slovakian. So then and I have a lot of paperwork with me. Not everything, but I had quite a box load of papers that I didn't understand anything. And Emery said, well, bring as much as you can. And because I'm still trying to find out the name of the lady that hit us. So we're in the Nitra Hotel. We finally register. And that night, I left everything with him in his room. He comes running next door, and he says, I found the lady who hid you. And it was Joseph Dobertina. And that was her address. It was actually a receipt that she had given Ben when he paid her, he requested a receipt from her, the money that he gave her, and there was the receipt with her name and address on it. So we had her address, and we were all excited about trying to find her the next morning.
What happened?
You want some more?
What happened
Okay,
next?
all right. Well, so we're back in the rental car, and we're driving not too far from the hotel, and he's looking for the street that's on the receipt. And we have a map of Nitra, an old map. And sure enough, he circles the street where we're supposed to be looking for her, and there's no such street, and he doesn't understand what's going on. So he asked somebody walking on the street, he said, what happened to this so-and-so street? An old timer. And he said, well, I think when the Russians came in the 60s, they tore down a lot of buildings, they restructured the city, and they must have taken that street out. He said, however, told him we were looking for somebody. He said, there is somebody, there's an old age home up the street. Why don't you go up there? Maybe somebody remembers who this woman was. So we walk up the street, old age woman, and there's a nurse downstairs. And she said, there is a gentleman upstairs. He must have been in his 80s at that point. Emery said, let me go upstairs and talk to him. Bobby and I did not go upstairs, but Emery went upstairs, and he comes down, and he said he knew the lady. She had children after me, but they were had criminal problems. But he does remember, she died some years ago, he said, maybe 5 years before we got there. He did remember actually seeing a little toddler around and wondered who that toddler was, or they weren't close, I don't think, but he didn't mention the toddler, which was me. So that was as close as we got to finding the lady. We spent another day or two traveling around and then flew back we drove to Vienna. He flew back to Tel Aviv, and I flew back.
Before you left Nitra, and you find this about Mrs. Rubafina, tell us about your parents' apartment and what you did there.
Sure. Well, we found the apartment. We were looking for two things. The apartment, we had that address, and sure enough, there it was, still there.
The apartment
that the parents lived in Nitra. I don't remember the street, but Bobby and I have a picture of that, which we took. And then we were also looking for the synagogue that my father was the cantor in. And sure enough, and Emery knew where all this was anyway. Go and see the synagogue. It's still there, and it's again constructed in the Gothic Moorish style of tall steeples, not like an Orthodox synagogue. And there's a gate there, but it was locked. It was a chain lock fence. And maybe 20 feet on the building, there was this plaque I referred to earlier that dedicated to the 6,000 Jews killed during the Holocaust, which I think was dedicated in early 50s. And Emery could see that far, so he read it to me. And we took a picture of it. It's hard to read, but we couldn't get in the building, and it looked a little dilapidated. But I have since found out that the building has been refurbished and is now used by the civic community in Nitra. It's still there.
What did it feel like to be back in that city and imagine?
Well, that was real.
1944?
Yeah. Well, we were walking around the town square. Again, it's a pretty large city. I think it's like the third largest city now, and bustling city. And just standing in front, we couldn't get inside the apartment. Obviously, we were there by the front door, but we couldn't get into the actual apartment. I must have contained 4 or 5 apartments in that building. And, it felt good, really, just to be there, take that picture and walk around. And we were hoping to get into the synagogue, but could not get in.
Some cities have put these stones where Jews were taken as a memory to them. Did Nitra, Slovakia do any of that?
I don't think so. I think that it was concrete, but it was stone against the building was probably the only thing they had from Nitra.
When you went to Vienna, did you go to any place that your parents grew up or lived? Did you go back in time there as well?
Yes. Well, it's also interesting. I'd like to discuss a little bit about the name Trauner and the fact that Bobby and I, every time we traveled around the country and the world, she would look up the phone book to see if there were any names Trauner. Very, very rarely would we find anything, but we're checking into the hotel in Nitra, and there behind the stand is Trauner Clockworks, and that just stunned me almost. Couldn't believe it. So she also looked up the phone book, and I'm sorry, this was in Vienna Hotel, not in Nitra, the Vienna Hotel in Austria. And in the hotel, she looked up the telephone book, and there must have been 20, 30 pages of small print of the name Trauner. So that was interesting to see. So what was your original question?
So
I know I
Ben and your
diverted.
mother grew up in Vienna.
Yeah,
Did you
okay.
go to that family where your family lived?
I don't. We took a bus or a train, Emery, and we went to where my grandmother's restaurant was. And I think her apartment was right next to the restaurant. It was a high rise, which was now a motorcycle shop, motorcycle repair shop, and that was the restaurant. He said, "This is where your grandmother," and I guess, I don't know if Ben was born there or not, but when he showed me, he said, "Look at all these pock marks on the building," and that Vienna was one of the countries, or the cities rather, that were bombed by the Allies, and these were pock marks from the bombing near the building that actually hit the building. So we did see that building. It was in the old Jewish neighborhood, which wasn't Jewish anymore, but so we did see that in Vienna.
So, you and Bobby go back and find these places of your past. Ben, your father now, did he ever go back or want to take you?
I think he went back, I know, but there was never any discussion about taking me back there. It would have been interesting and fun, I assume, but there was never any. I mean, I don't remember him asking and say, "No, I don't want to go. It's too far." I don't remember the question being asked.
So did you feel growing up that you knew you were hidden, but it was just something in the closet, like not something to tell the world about?
Yeah. It's like being in the closet. And then I slowly came out of the closet, and came out a lot when my ex-partner's sister, Judy Cohen, heard about the story. And she likes to write. And she's very interested in the Holocaust. So she heard about my story. This was in the, I guess, the late 90s also. And I said, "All right, I have all this paraphernalia. I don't know anything about it. It's all hearsay. It was maybe stuff told to me. But we have all of this information." And she says, "Well, why don't we try to get it translated as far as the German Yiddish part?" And I gave her the opportunity, actually, and she spent a lot of time going through she went through almost every letter. Plus, we had a translator help translate some of the pictures, which showed who these people were, and also the letters that were written between Ben and his sister. Hundreds of letters written in German. And Judy compiled all that, put it together as a memoir, let's say. And then she tried to find a playwright or someone who would, agent, who would represent her in trying to get it published. And I guess Judy would complete the story, write a full story. But she couldn't get anybody to do that. And I didn't want to self-publish at that point.
So you're a hidden child. Did you consider yourself a survivor?
No. Interesting question. Not when I was young, no. Later on in life I did.
And what changed that perspective?
Well, I guess when I learned more of what went on, and when you reach a certain age of realizing what happened and learning more of how it occurred, certainly I was a survivor. But again, other than the fact that there were many other hidden children, I didn't think there were that many. It's not something that I said, well, I know there's Anne Frank. Everybody heard about Anne Frank. You hear stories about children going into convents and being converted to Christianity, but I didn't expect it to be on tens of thousands of hidden children.
Well, you also mentioned that you now see um, impact of that younger years of
Mm.
being careful, being quiet.
Sure. Mm.
That impacted you in unbeknownst to you, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe subconsciously or whatever.
So let's take a break.
Okay.
So we have Ben, who is your uncle and your father.
Mhm.
Can you tell me his birth name?
I guess it was Benno, Benno, two N's, but he was known as both Benno and Ben, mostly Ben
And his last name?
Trauner.
And did Ben ever talk to you at all about the war, what he did in the army, or how he found you and brought you here? Did he ever talk about that with you?
You would think he would, but not that I recall. Nothing. Mm.
And so for your family that's left, it's Ben, your father, uncle, your grandmother who died when you were how old?
8 to 10 years old.
Okay. And then your cousin Emre, who goes by many different names
Yes.
and spellings. So why don't you say his name and then spell it completely, and then you can spell the different versions.
I've known him mostly as Imri, but I think his formal name was Imrich, Imrich. And now
his last name?
Ganzi, Gonczi. And now I know he's also was known as Emrich, Emrich, Ganzi, Gonczi.
And is he still alive?
No, passed away in 2015.
And so he was a strong connection to you? You traveled with him, kept up with him?
Yes.
Did he feel like a brother or cousin?
Yes, he did. Almost like a father figure, too.
Why a father figure?
Well, he was older than I. He was about 17 years older. And he's just such a gentle, nice man, comforting. Never saw him get angry. He didn't even talk badly. He talked badly, I guess, about his captors, but he didn't use a voice that was revengeful or anything like that. He was very calm. And I know he spoke at many different locations and all over the world, telling what happened to him.
And not so much today we're here to tell his story, but how did his story influence you?
Well, I mean, it's a big part of my story. It makes it a lot more interesting. And
please share.
To share his story, because he shared it with the world. So I'm sharing his story with my story also.
You kept up with him all the years. Did you get to know his children? Would they then become your extended family as well?
Yes, they would. But his younger child was Yana, a young lady who I remember meeting, actually visiting Ben in Dadeville, Alabama, when she was in this country, I guess. And I'm not sure. She passed away fairly young. I don't think she had any children. And then he had has a son, Peter Ganzi, who is someone we met, but my wife and I didn't feel very close to him. I know he was incarcerated and suffered some criminal ramifications. So we last saw him, I think we actually did see him when we were traveling in the 90s, traveling to find my lady.
So I know you have children, but before we go there, how does it feel to be the legacy of the family from the war? How does that feel?
Well, it feels like maybe the last Trauner, because I have two daughters. And I actually, several years ago, I got a call, and I haven't called back. Priscilla Trauner called me from California. And this is 10:50. I don't know if she's still alive. But for some reason, she called me because she knew about me. And I think her father was a dentist in New York. And she wasn't even sure I was hidden. She knew I was brought over to this country. But I sent her a copy of this memoir. I sent a copy of this memoir to several cousins and individuals. But that's the last conversation we had was 10, 15 years ago. I don't know if she's still alive.
How did she fit in the family tree?
I didn't see her in this. Priscilla Trauner. I don't see her in the family tree. Maybe you can find her. She was like an unknown Trauner.
Stop. It's my cell phone. It's on silent.
Okay, that's okay. I just was trying to check.
Have we stopped?
You want me to stop?
Yeah.
Okay. Really?
So let's catch up a little bit more about your American life.
Sure.
In terms of that. So you're adopted by Ben and Frances, 3.5 years old. Do you know if they wanted to have other children?
I don't, they may have wanted to, but again, I've always understood Frances to have had a hysterectomy. I don't know if that was before I was there or afterwards. I know she wanted to have a child based upon the letters. Come home, Ben, I want a child. But I think that was before she even knew about me. I don't know.
And was Frances Jewish?
Yes.
What kind of Jewish household was it? Did you belong to a synagogue? What was life like from a Jewish standpoint growing up?
Right. Well, we belonged to a conservative synagogue, Temple Israel in Great Neck, Long Island. I don't remember we didn't have an observant home in the sense of having a Shabbat meal every Saturday. I do remember on the high holidays, my father and I used to walk to the synagogue. He would not drive, or he would leave his car there before sunset and not pick it up until after, he could get it. But we would walk from the house. I remember that specifically. Pretty long walk, about 3-4 miles. It was always a little chilly up north in September and October. But I enjoyed walking with him, going to services. Sometimes I would leave a little early, walk back, but he would stay until the end and, of course, have his car there and drive home.
Did you go to any either Jewish Sunday school or any type of religious school?
Yes, of course, for the bar mitzvah, I went to school, and after I was bar mitzvah, I went to confirmation for another 2 years, I think until I was 16. And learned a little Hebrew, and as far as conversational Hebrew, but didn't take it past that.
So sometimes when children do bar mitzvahs, sometimes they do twinning with someone from the Holocaust. Did you do anything in honor of your birth parents at your bar mitzvah?
No, I think I had a twin though, because it was so crowded. There were so many bar mitzvahs. There were 2 bar mitzvahs, and it was actually 6 months after I was 13. It was so many bar mitzvahs, but there was really no recognition. We didn't talk about it. Nobody knew about it, so there's no recognition about my birth parents.
So your high school American, at what point, what happened when you had to register for the draft? Were you a citizen yet or not?
I don't think they didn't have a draft.
No, you didn't have to register for.
I don't remember.
You turn 18.
Well, as far as they had no draft when I was draft age. And they just started the number system after I was already in. But I had, during the Vietnam War, nobody really wanted to go, quite honestly, very few. And I was at Emory Law School. And Ben Trauner, my father, tried to maybe I couldn't get into a reserve unit somewhere, and there were really no openings available anywhere, he was going to try to get me into the National Guard in Dadeville, Alabama. I mean, the factory was right next to the National Guard building, and he was going to try to get me in there. And you know, in a lot of his letters between Ben and Francis, they all talk about if you have pull, you can get stuff done. So this was one thing he was going to try to do as a last resort. And unfortunately, the last month before law school ended, an opening had come up at the Army Reserve, the 461st Army Reserve in Ponce de Leon, that big building that's there in Atlanta. And half the law school went down and signed up. And we all were worried we would actually be taken for basic training before we graduated law school. But as it turned out, we weren't called up for basic training until about 6 months after we graduated. So that was my Army obligation for 6 years.
So you got bar mitzvah, you went to, you said Great Neck High School?
Great Neck North.
And then how did the family get from New York to the South?
Okay. Well, being an only child, when I went off to college, of course, Ben was traveling back and forth a lot to the South. And they felt that there was no reason to stay up north. His brother-in-law, Herb, was running the showroom in the Empire State Building. And they had this factory in the South where Ben would fly down 2 or 3 times a month, spend a while and come back. Let's just move. So it was a choice of Birmingham, Alabama, which is about 2 hours from Dadeville, or Atlanta, Georgia, which is a little further, not too far, 2.5 hours. So they picked Atlanta. Now back then, Birmingham, this is in the early 60s. Birmingham and Atlanta were about the same size. I remember the old Atlanta airport was like Quonset huts. It was really an old-fashioned type airport. But they chose Atlanta, and they were here 1 or 2 seasons, and then I started coming here during Columbia for summer, and decided to stay down here and go to school, graduate school here in Atlanta.
So you went to Columbia University?
Went to Columbia undergraduate, Columbia College. And then when I was down, I first applied to the business school in Emory, graduate business school. And then my father, Ben, and I realized that most of the courses I had already taken, economics being an economics major at Columbia. So it was sort of a last-minute decision to go to law school. And there was always some discussion about maybe, what Bobby and I discussed, maybe should I go into my father's business? Because Herb had no male heirs. Girls were not interested in the business. And I was the only other heir. And I don't recall too many conversations directly with Ben. He didn't really want to talk about it. He didn't talk about much. He really was very reticent. But we thought about it, and fortunately, I decided to go to law school. I actually went to the law school and asked, "Can I come in? I'm already admitted to the business school. Can I go to the law school?" And I took the LSAT and was admitted. There's a story I think I may have told you about walking in and the dean asking me, "Where'd you go to college?" And I said, "Columbia." And he said, "I didn't know Columbia, meaning South Carolina, had a college." I said, "No, this is New York, the Ivy League." He said, "You from Columbia?" I don't remember if he said, "You're the first," or "would be the first," or "we haven't had many Ivy League graduates." But he said, "You're in. You just have to take the LSAT. And believe me, if you just sign your name, you'll get in. But you have to take that test." So I was, I guess, one of the first Ivy League entrants to the law school in 1965.
And then you start your career with a firm and ended up in what type of law?
Well, it's bankruptcy law. When I got out of my basic training from the reserves in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I came to Atlanta and started looking for work and went to the Atlanta Bar Association office, and they had a sign there, attorney wanted at Lipschutz, Macy, Zusman, and Sykes, which happened to be a bankruptcy boutique. In those days, the big major law firms didn't do bankruptcy or collection work. They farmed those out to 1 or 2 firms, Lipschutz, Macy being one of them. A lot of bankruptcy work. And they asked me if I ever had bankruptcy experience, and I said they didn't even have a bankruptcy course in law school back then, much less experience. But you know, you learn on the job. I took the job because it was the first one offered. And in those days, even today, it's not that easy getting a job out of law school unless you're like in the top 2% of your class. It's difficult. A lot of kids, guys who don't know what they want to do, go to law school. I think it's a good idea. So I became a lawyer, and that started in bankruptcy because that's what they did. I stayed there 3 or 4 years. And after that, 1973, I started my own law firm known as Trauner, King and Cohen. Myself, Kevin King, and Michael J. Cohen. Michael J. Cohen's mother was like the major child care lady at the Jewish Center when it used to be downtown, the Jewish Community Center. She was there like 30, 40 years. I don't remember her first name, but it was Cohen. So a lot of the generation, my generation, grew up with her. And so we started that law firm. And basically that was it for 30, 40 years. And then eventually that split up and I stayed on my own for 5 or 10 years and now retired.
So here you come to the South from the North,
Mm-hmm.
Jewish. What type of culture change or experience did you have moving to a different part of the country?
Yeah. Well, again, we, being conservative in New York, we joined Ahavat Ahim. My parents joined. But you're talking about cultural experiences.
So Abba Haim is also known as
AA
synagogue in
Synagogue.
Atlanta.
Right. And it's still there on Peachtree Battle. I know it started earlier in the city, but I guess this was in the 60s we joined. And some of the cultural shock that even before that, when I used to work down in my father's factory during the summer, I remember vividly flying in on Capital Airlines prop, no jets back then, and seeing at the Atlanta airport the signs for colored and white that you hear about, read about in the North, but you don't really experience it. But that was a cultural shock. Didn't really, Davie, Alabama, I don't think had any other Jews than my father, but there was never any feeling of anti-Semitism, or at least that I experienced there.
Did you have any experiences growing up Jewish in Atlanta, or did you?
I grew up in the North, so I didn't have, and of course, Great Neck happened to be 50 to 60% Jewish anyway. It was a majority of Jewish kids. It was a very nice community. You didn't have to send your children to private school like you do here. It was a very good education that I had at Great Neck. It started off as Great Neck, and then when I was a sophomore, it split at Great Neck North and Great Neck South. So I graduated from Great Neck North.
And you came to Atlanta as an adult?
I came to Atlanta, yes. You know, when I was a sophomore, I guess, in college, I spent a summer or two here and then full time.
How important was it for you, or did it just happen to marry a Jewish person?
How important? That's an interesting question. I happened to have dated mostly Jewish women, although I dated Gentile women. I know my parents, I wonder how they would have felt that I brought home a non-Jewish woman. But I would think most of my contacts were Jewish individuals.
Let's talk a little bit about some things that about the mantra of you growing up is, I think you mentioned, keep the past, don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Were there moments where you might have pushed back on that or wanted to know more while growing up or as a young adult?
I don't recall any specific instances where it just blurted out, I need to talk about this, and I must have accepted it and just stayed in my place. Now, some of Ben's, what we call Landsmen, fellow Austrians or from Germany that moved to the United States, I have a feeling that they were informed of what was going on. The fact that because I think they must have known that they didn't have children or couldn't have children, and they just were part of the experience of me being adopted and whatever.
Did they ever have those folks over to the house or?
I don't recall that much socializing up north. I have no recollection of that.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier about maybe there was jewelry left with the neighbor. Was there other things your uncle researched or maybe you after the war to get any type of, I think, insurance or anything else related to your parents that?
Right. Well, I know he did a lot of research, and I saw periodicals and letters where he was trying to get his pension from Austria. And also, I think he hired an attorney to try to get reparations. I don't know if they were for me or for him, as a sibling, but that resulted in something, but not very much.
So you have children.
Yes.
Can you tell us what type of
Sure.
children, their ages,
Okay.
their names? If you
Well, we have Jamie, Rosen, and Allison Bibiak, and they were born 3 years apart to the day, September 9, 1976 and 1979. And they both went to Pace Academy as children from pre-first all the way through high school, end of high school. So Jamie went to Duke University, and there she met Michael Rosen at Duke University. And they dated and were very serious and were maybe thinking about even getting married right after college, but they wanted to go to graduate school. Michael applied to University of Pennsylvania. His father was a graduate of medical school at UP. And so Jamie applied in the veterinary school because she's always wanted to be a veterinarian. She was accepted, and Michael was accepted. But lo and behold, he was also on the waiting list at Harvard Medical School. Sure enough, at the last minute, he said, I can't turn down Harvard Medical School. And Jamie agreed. So he went off to Harvard, she went to Penn, and they had the 4-year dating. They were engaged to get married right after they graduated. So they got, as soon as they graduated, they got married. It's been about 20 years now. And she has 2 children, Jack Rosen, 13, and Molly Rosen, who's 16.
So for your children, sometimes the tradition of how you name your children, did you name your children after your birth parents, your parents, Ben and Frances, Hebrew or English? Did any of your wives?
I think we did. I mean, Beth is Jamie's middle name, Jamie Beth, and maybe that's after Bella. I don't recall per se thinking about it, but I think that may be a link. And Allie, a little bit about Allie. Allie graduated from Pace also, and then she went to 1 year at the University of Georgia, and she found it just too much noise and you couldn't study, and she didn't really like it, so she transferred. She was actually accepted at Vanderbilt also, but she didn't go there. She went to Richmond, and she had a great time at Richmond. Then she got her master's degree in communications hospitality at Cornell, so she had a master's degree there. And then she married about 10 years ago, Alex Bibiak, whose mother happened to be Czechoslovakian, not Jewish. And he had 4 children already. And since then they had one boy, Brooks Bibiak, who's now 8 years old. So they have their own child too. And she works for Aviana Healthcare, which is a national company. She does a very good job there. And I'll tell you what Alex does is he's in charge of Ray's on the River's restaurants. He's the main guy. I'm sure you remember Ray's on the River and Ray's downtown in Killer Creek. So he has a good job.
So you have your children, you have your family history. Did they ever meet your mother, Frances?
Oh, yes.
Because she died
1991. 1991.
So,
But
what
but
did
Ben never, Jamie, I guess was when he passed away in 1974. We were married 2 years, so he 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 did not know. I guess he knew we were trying to have a family, but he never knew. Ben never knew any of the grandchildren, but Frances did.
so Ben passed away? You had your mom, Frances.
Mhm.
Did that open up the door wider for Emmerich?
Emmerich? No, probably closed it. Made it. I mean, I didn't ask her permission. Didn't really. She knew. Obviously, we're going to San Diego for a business trip. I'm going to look up Emory. So it wasn't at that point. Ben wasn't alive anymore. I don't think she cared one way or the other.
So, at some point, you become this father and you have your children. Um, at what point did you tell them about your birth and childhood? Did they ask you, where'd you come from? And where were you born? When did that
I
happen?
don't recall specifically when, but I would imagine when they were fairly young. Not something I hid from them at all. I don't think I went into detail. I still didn't have a lot of the detail anyway until Frances passed away.
So let's talk about Frances passing away. You kind of shared that Frances passing away was a pivotal moment for you. Can you talk about that? 1991, after she passed away, and
Well,
that.
before that, after Ben passed away, of course, she continued living in the house that they had on Sheldon Drive. And then after Ben passed away, she remained here a couple of years, and then went to Florida. Forgot the name of the actual city. Bought a condominium, sold a house in Atlanta, had no difficulty selling it. Bought the condo, and we used to visit her, maybe once a month. We drove down with the grandkids and spent a lot of time with her, and she was very happy there until she got sick. And then we had to sell the condo, and then we put her into the Jewish home that she stayed in for a couple of years. Now, actually, I don't know if I'd mentioned this, her father, Harry Weinrib, was in the Jewish home for years. So he moved to Atlanta. He actually married, do you remember the Coach and Six restaurant, Beverly Soloff?
In Atlanta,
In Atlanta, Georgia. Her mother lived in Brooklyn, and my grandfather lived in Brooklyn. My birth grandmother, Molly Weinberg, passed away, and they were in the same apartment, and they knew each other. They decided to get married. He was 80 years old, and she was probably in her late 70s. They married, and then they lived in Brooklyn for a couple of years, and they then decided to move to Atlanta. By the time they did that, my grandfather was like in his mid to late 80s, and Molly was in her 70s, so they went right into the Jewish home. And they were together for a year or two, and then his wife passed away. And he lived till about 95 years of age. He was in the Jewish home. He did a lot of sewing. He had a tailor background also, and he lived to ripe old age. And we have a picture of him holding Jamie when she was like less than 6 months old. And I think he passed away shortly after she was born. He was 95 years old. This is Francis's father.
So Frances ends up in the Jewish home, and you've already downsized her a couple of times, but then she passes away. Did you discover this legacy of yours, these letters, this history, when you moved into the Jewish home or after?
It's interesting. I don't recall. Obviously, we were holding all these materials because you're not going to keep them in the Jewish home. We had a lot of her stuff, and I don't remember. I probably started looking through it, certainly before she passed away. I never questioned her about anything, though, when she was in the Jewish home, because I think she lost a lot of her cognitive reasoning anyway. But I may have started looking into it before she actually passed away.
So she passes away, and you have all these, this history in front of you in a box, pictures and everything. What did you and Bobby go through together? What were you thinking as you went through it? What were your thoughts?
No, I went through it all and found it pretty fascinating. And I think I probably started my research before I found out about the Gathering for Hidden Children. I think that was just like frosting on the cake. But I started my research probably in the early 90s.
How did you read the letters? If they were they in English, with some in
I,
German?
it was in English. All the letters between Ben and Frances were English. And you could follow that, one pile with Ben's letters, one pile with Frances' letters. And they coordinated one letter, you see the date, and you see the response back and forth for a period of like 2 years. Now, a lot of the stuff was in German or Yiddish or whatever, which we never had translated until Judy started looking into this book. And most of those letters were just letters between a brother and a sister, see how things are going. And after the war started, we found out later that it was a lot of concern, and he was trying to get his mother out of Europe. And even when she was in the concentration camp, their letters from American Red Cross and back and forth. That were in it.
Do you know what camp that your mother, father, and Adela were sent to?
I'm sure. I was thinking Auschwitz. I didn't know if it was Birkenau or maybe they were transferred to Mauthausen. I never really knew the details, but I knew it was Auschwitz to start, I think.
So with these letters, you have, for lack of a better analogy, 3 different movies going on. The relationship between Ben and Frances,
Yep.
the movie of your father, uncle with his family, and then the beginning of your life story. How did each of those stories help you find out who you were or who your parents were?
No, I mean, it all either started or came. It didn't come back. I mean, it started from inception. These different stories, which again, I found Ben's story in trying to run the business as interesting as mine. Just the fascination of trying to start a business in the middle of the war and leaving the business to fight against the Nazis, and the letters back and forth. And I read a lot of the pain that was existing at that point. I don't know initially if my parents had a happy marriage. Were they married? They were married before they knew about me, but I have a feeling that once I was there, that kept the marriage together. And there was a lot of difficulty domestically, and between problems that Ben had with Frances after the business succeeded, but just back and forth problems that he had with her and jealousies that she had, and his illness, his high blood pressure, his diabetes, and the war actually contributed. 67 is when he passed away. Pretty young, but he was sick for 30, 40 years. He had a ruddy complexion. You could see his high blood pressure was really up there. And they fought quite a lot. I mean, I remember that from college and law school days. There was a lot of fighting.
So you took care of Frances after your father passed away.
Well, that was
She took care of you as a young child.
Yeah, well, that was interesting also. When he passed away, and it was sudden, it was a heart attack. Then the animosity started between Frances and Herb, her brother-in-law, and her sister. How was her interest in the business going to be liquidated? How would it be? Because she wasn't participating. And of course, Ben said business isn't doing well, which maybe it wasn't. A lot of competition from Japan and Taiwan. So they got attorneys, and there was a little, I don't know if it was a lawsuit, but there was some little dissension there. And finally, they wound up giving her some money. You know, who knows if it was correct or not, but so she took that money and started investing in, bought some stocks, Ma Bell, Bell South and stuff. So she had, and then when she sold the house, she had a little money and bought the house. So she was okay. I did not have to support her in any way after he passed away.
So, in terms of, I wanted to ask you this question first relating to family, and before I go into another direction. You shared that when your daughter's children got married, you gave a speech. Can you
Mm.
describe what type of speech you gave and why it was so important?
Well, the typical father of the bride speech, which of course every father gives, welcomes the other side of the family into the family and how happy we are and everything like that. But then I know Jamie's wedding about 20 years ago, and there's a video, of course, that was being taken of all this, plus including my speech. And Bobby at first, I told her what I want to do. I want to just tell a little bit about history. In fact, we're so fortunate to be together. She wasn't too excited about that. She said, this is not your story. This is about your daughter and son-in-law. I said, no, I'm compelled. I want to say something. So it was a muchly abridged version of my story, but it started out, a lot of people didn't know I was even adopted or hidden, didn't know I was a hidden child. You know, and you can see people's eyes light up. And I said, yeah, I was born in Nitra and right in the middle of World War II. Didn't understand why I was even born. Explained that I was born in 43 and we had a period of peace, very short period of peace, 1944. My grandmother and parents and I were told to leave the house, take your belongings, and go to the train station. And then I said, well, we were off to the train station, and this Gentile lady said, I don't know if I used the word killing all the children, but everybody knew at that point where we were going. And this lady kept me and hid me. And my parents went off, and grandmother, and they were put in the concentration camp. And in the meantime, Ben Trauner, who's my adoptive father, was fighting in the army, and he came to look for his sister and his mother and found out about the hidden child and all that. And he kept me there for a year, tried to get visas. I mean, I don't think I went into too much detail, but that was basically it. So I did say, and I said, once again, my grandmother and I went to the train station together, but this time not to the concentration camp, but to a better country, better world. So I told that story, and it was a very moving story for most people too. In fact,
Why was it important for you to do it at the wedding? What was the compelling, I have to do this?
well, the father of the bride is supposed to give a good story, and I thought that was a good time to. I was already out of the closet mostly, personally.
Did it feel like if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be here
Well,
today
that,
giving my daughter away?
yeah, sure. In fact, my last words were, if it weren't for all those fortuitous incidences, we wouldn't be here celebrating this wonderful event. That was my final words. And I did basically the same thing for Allie's wedding 10 years ago.
So you were saved, you were hidden.
Yep.
Your parents sacrificed for you to be alive. This woman sacrificed for you to be alive.
I think she did, because if she were caught, she'd probably be executed.
Your uncle searched for you to be with family. Do you think about those things?
Well, I mean, if Ben was not in D-Day Normandy, but I know he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, he could have been killed. He was in combat support. He wasn't actually in combat. Of course, if he hadn't survived, no, there are a lot of fortuitous circumstances that enabled this story to be told.
So a lot of people came to save you so you could be at your daughter's wedding.
That was the result, yes.
You just shared that you used the word came out, the story or the club, whatever. Why? Have you told your story to others, or has it just been recent you've been wanting to share more?
Well, let's put it this way. If we weren't on the same board together, I wouldn't be here today. It's that people have asked me, have you spoken to schools? Have you spoken to other parties about this? And I said, I have not, for several reasons. One being that I am still a lot introverted and shy. Number two, it's emotional for me to talk about it. And maybe I would do it if I had a nice PowerPoint presentation because it's so confusing with all these names and maybe I would do it today if it could be set up, but it's not something that I have done.
So, why are you doing this today? For you, your wife, your children, grandchildren, what message do you want to get across to them if they've watched this video?
Well, my children know about it already.
How do they feel about it?
They've read the book. They've heard it verbatim. It's not something, I say, here it is. Here's your book. You can show it to the children. I think they've read it. Brooks hasn't, but I think my other grandchildren have. And I'm doing this interview because of you, really. I mean, I've enjoyed working, serving on the board of directors, and I wouldn't have even thought about it otherwise doing this interview.
Thank you for sharing that. But are you glad you've done it?
Sure. It's good. It's good to talk about it. Feels good.
How will you feel once you get the video and you have something to hand to Brooks and their future children?
I think it's
great grandchildren.
It's something that it's a legacy that they could keep from generation to generation. You talk about generation to generation a lot in Jewish religion. So here's the video. Here's the story. Compact, concise, not like going through hundreds and hundreds of letters and writing a book about it, but this is good.
So you have this outline of a memoir, so to speak. Does this video make it more permanent, so it's for others to learn from your story about resilience? Does that?
Yeah, but that's why I asked you earlier, how's this indexed? Who's going to look at this? Who really cares about it? You have 53,000 stories. I'm sure as compelling as mine, maybe a little more. This is a little more unusual because there are other stories involved, and not just being a Holocaust survivor. I mean, it's good to have it there for the family and generations to come, but who else isn't even going to know about it? I don't mind telling the story. I started 15, 20 years ago, maybe at my child's wedding, and certainly after this book was prepared, I've handed it out, this memoir, I've handed it out to friends, and they're all very appreciative, and they say, thank you for sharing it with me. And has it made any difference in my friendships? I don't think so.
So, well, in terms of the story, we thank you so much for doing this. It will live on and tell a story. But you started the journey before taping, before all of this.
Sure.
You researched a little bit before Francis was born. What drove that desire to learn more, and then even more so after Francis passed away, that we're here today hearing the result of all your research? Why was that important to you?
It's curiosity. Who you are, why you got to be that person, why you're even alive today. So.
You consider yourself to be Jewish?
Yes.
Do you still go to services and high holy days? Do you pass on traditions to your children and grandchildren?
Well, Jamie is very observant, belongs to a synagogue. Allie has probably, I don't think since she's been bar mitzvahed, she never really wanted to continue the Jewish tradition. She's married to a Gentile guy. I don't think they belong to a church. I'm not sure what their religious efforts are, if any, to instill in their children. We moved to Cobb County about a year and a half ago. And recently I've been thinking of joining Eitz Chaim Synagogue. But for the last couple of years, I have not been observant.
We also have been through COVID. In terms of
Well,
did that influence it at all?
Nah, yes, I guess so. But I don't know why. I don't know if there's an answer to that. You would think that somebody in my position would espouse the Jewish faith and want to pursue that immediately or continuously, and there's been a gap now. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
A lot of factors there that you can think about: COVID, relocation, just things. And yet, tell me about, you mentioned we're on a board together. Tell me what activities you're involved in related to Holocaust survivors or outreach. Can you talk about that?
Actually, the JFCS is the only group that I got acquainted with, and apparently I do serve on that as a Holocaust survivor, and I have to participate in the granting of use of funds that comes from the German Claims Conference. So I do participate in that.
How does it make you feel to be involved in that with your?
No, I something I enjoy. But when we travel so much, I miss the meetings, the quarterly meetings annually, and I miss at least one a year, if not two, because we're always traveling. But
here you've come full circle. You were a hidden child, and now you are helping those who are still with us with emergency funds. How does that make you feel?
Obviously, it makes me feel very good.
So is that your new religion, helping that way? You're still involved in Jewish life that way?
I should be involved more.
Let's talk about your parents. What is your most memorable memory of your father? I know you talked about walking to synagogue, that might be it, but
talking about Ben and Frances?
Ben and Frances, your parents.
Frances was very, very protective of me. That's what I remember of her. I mean, she loved me and I loved her, but she was so nervous about me, anything happening to me. Because I remember growing up in high school, a lot of my friends would take the Long Island Railroad, go downtown New York City. She wouldn't let me go. She said, you don't need to go to New York by yourself with friends. You don't need to play football in high school. You might get hurt. And again, you know, I definitely was spoiled, but I was, I think, overly protected. Ben he was wonderful. Again, we never really discussed details of the Holocaust. I knew when he was talking about it to Frances and even Emery, you could see how upset he was. And I'm sure that led to his early death. First being in the Army and the daily rigors of the Army and his medical condition. And then, of course, once getting to Europe and finding out what happened, had a great deal in causing his early death. And I don't understand. I would have liked to find out how he spoke English so well. And he came to this country in 1938. And we have a letter of referral from his former employer in Vienna, typed in English, indicating how great an employee he was. He's been there since 1925. This was 1938, the letter. It was written after the Anschluss, indicating that the employer's business, because of political reasons, had to be shut down. And therefore, this is a letter of introduction. We feel Ben Trauner is going to be successful, and we hope he is, and we had to shut the business down. And it was quite a struggle for him. How he learned English as well as he did, he didn't even have an accent. I don't understand that, but, you know, he must have learned it in school. You don't use English in a foreign language as part of your daily business, but he learned it obviously at a young age. He found maybe a little difficult sometimes to communicate, but you couldn't tell he was a foreigner. Might have had a little difficulty, especially when he was angry, trying to communicate with my mother and maybe even me at times.
So obviously Francis only spoke English.
Yes.
While your grandmother was alive, do you remember them talking in Slovakian to each other?
Well, Frances didn't know any Slovakian. I think I may have indicated earlier she tried to diminish Adele's, my grandmother's,
Right, but
conversation.
I meant Adele and your father, Ben. Did they ever talk in their native language?
Oh, I see.
Do you
Well,
recall?
she eventually she was here 4 or 5 years before she passed away. She knew English, Adele, and I'm sure they can. I don't remember in front of me, but I'm sure they communicated in Yiddish or German all the time.
Um, how do you think your upbringing at all influenced your role either in the Jewish community or success or failures or anything in life for you? Did it impact you at all? Was it
A Jewish upbringing that I had through
or
through
the fact
college.
that you were a hidden child, or do you think it influenced how you lived
Other
your
than the
life?
fact that, I think it's shaped my personality to the extent made me an introvert and somewhat shy, but nothing professional.
Um, there's a lot going on in the world today. You came to Atlanta in the 70s, you said? 60s, 70s, 65 or so?
65, yeah.
So over this long period of time, did you witness or personally experience any anti-Semitism?
No, I did not. It does seem to be more prevalent today than it's been in Atlanta. You're talking all over the world, but certainly in Atlanta, and I noticed in Cobb County, moving to Cobb County, there have been quite a few incidents since we've been here about 2 years, which is disturbing. But we say never again.
Does it worry you?
There is again.
Does it worry you with this age we're in and this time period of?
Yes, it does, of course. And this is as bad as it's been since the Holocaust, for sure. It's very disturbing.
So we've already talked about why you came forward today to share the story. Is there anything else you want to add or tell for your children, grandchildren, future great-grandchildren that you would like to share on the tape on your story?
I think you've read the quote memoir, and there's a lot more information that we've developed besides the memoir. And I do want to thank you for all of the information you've found about Ben's business and other stuff I wasn't even aware of. So I think this is a very gratifying moment for me. And children, grandchildren, never forget whatever small influence this has on them, to remember what happened and why they're even alive today. Goes a long way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're rolling.
Great. So why don't you tell us who you are? Go ahead,
Roberta Newman Trauner. I was born in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York.
So can you please spell for me Roberta and then Newman?
Robertnewman.
So you're Robert, Bob.
Still here.
Would you repeat it again for us?
Robert Trauner.
So you two have been married for how long?
50 years. It's going to be 51 next month.
That's wonderful. So Bobby, I heard that you all met on a blind date.
We
What
did.
was that like, that first blind date?
He came to the door. I was living with my parents because I was in graduate school. And he came to the door, and I'll just tell you what he was wearing. He was wearing one of these puffy sleeve shirts, like a cucaracha shirt.
Manufactured by my
Manufactured
father.
by his father. Gives you some indication of the quality of the garment. Tight little like polyester pants and hush puppies. So he wasn't exactly like Mr. GQ. And he knew I was a nurse, and he took me out, and we stopped at a 7-Eleven, and he got a bag of chips and a big soda, and he wanted to take me back to his apartment because he wanted to know if I gave massages just because I was a nurse. He was pretty obnoxious actually, and I don't really know why I went out with him again, but he was like, he wasn't falling all over himself with me. He was like, he didn't care less if I liked him or not, which made me sort of like him. And it continued on. I think the second date, we again went back to his apartment, and he got a new like air hockey game, knock hockey, for us to play. And after that date, first of all, he would call me like on Thursday to see if I wanted to go out Friday or Saturday, which, you know, is just not nice. And sometimes I went and sometimes I didn't. But he started taking me out to really nice restaurants for dinner.
Stop.
So you set up for a blind date, and are you Jewish?
I am Jewish. I was raised Jewish. My mother converted. My mother was Protestant, and my father was Jewish, and his parents barely spoke to my mother for years. They hated the fact that they didn't care that she was had converted, and she converted Orthodox. But no, I was raised Jewish.
So was it important for you to date a Jewish person?
No, I dated a lot of non-Jewish guys. I had dated somebody all through college and expected to be married. And when it was clear that we weren't going to get married right away, I decided to leave New York and go to graduate school. And my parents had already moved down to Atlanta. So that's how I got to Atlanta. And I dated, I would say, mostly non-Jewish doctors in Atlanta. But it was nice. I mean, it was sort of nice. We sort of shared some of the same experiences.
Mm-hmm. So it's 50 years later, and during this 50-year marriage, how did you learn of Ben's childhood story?
I learned we had been dating for more than a year. It was November, and we went out to a nice restaurant on a Saturday night, and he asked me to marry him. What he said was, are you doing anything over Christmas? Because he knew I taught, so I was off on Christmas week. I said no, and he said, well, maybe we should get married. That's how he asked me. So I said, okay, because I really liked him by then. I mean, I loved him by then. And he said, so now there's something I should tell you. Oh, I'm pretty sure I said, how is your mother going to feel about this? Because his mother, I had met his mother, and I think she was not happy that my mother wasn't born Jewish. And I said, what do you think your mother will mind? And he said, actually, I was adopted. And that's when he told me the story. And I was like, aside from being flabbergasted about his asking me to marry him, I was flabbergasted about his story. And that's how I found out.
And how did you feel hearing about this child that actually was rescued by many people?
It made him even more amazing to me. You know, really, he's never been like someone who just unloads his whole self, you know, right away. And it made me feel closer to him. It really did. Because I started to feel some of the things that he was feeling. and he became more of a person to me, I think. I mean, you know, and now I knew something that no one else knew except his parents.
So, Bob, you shared how you told a little bit of your story or so at the wedding of your daughter.
Mm.
And how did it feel for you for that to be now become the family, to hear all of that?
I was glad he did it because I all along I've been saying, you know, you really should talk about it. It's really something that I think people need to hear. And he didn't tell me what I never saw what he was going to say. He never showed me the speech. He just said, I'm going to, I said, you know, have you done the father's speech? And he said, don't worry, I have it handled. And so I didn't know what he was going to say either. And everyone was crying actually. I mean, my kids didn't even know the story really.
So, how did your kids feel? What did they share with you or with Bob together?
I don't really know how they feel. Do you know how they feel?
Mm.
My older daughter, she's read the book, and I asked her whether she'd shared it with her older daughter, who's now 16, and she said no, because she thought that it would make her just too sad. It was just too upsetting. And my other daughter, she knows about it. They think that this is wonderful. They can't wait to hear how this turns out. But I don't know.
So, Bobby, I hear that when you travel to foreign countries, that phone books are very important to you. Why don't you tell us what you do and why you did it?
Well, it's so hard to find a Trowner in the United States. I know we found some Trowners in New York more than any other city, but I was just I just wanted to see whether there was a Trowner somewhere. So whether we went in the United States or abroad, we always looked in the phone book. And really, when we got to Austria, I did that when we got into the hotel, and I was amazed. There were pages of Trowners. We'd never seen anything like that
Mhm.
before. Plus, when we went to rent, I think it was a car rental place.
I think it was in the hotel.
In the
as we saw.
hotel, where someplace, just when we got there, there was a calendar, and it was Trowner something on the calendar, and it was like, wow, this is where he started.
So, Bob, you shared about going to the apartment and going to the nursing home, right, earlier?
In the synagogue and nursing
The
home.
synagogue. You went together.
Mhm.
How did you feel about walking that history?
I thought it was good for him to do that. I thought it was important for him to do that, and I was so happy that I could do it with him. I mean, it just was something that we did together, you know, as a family.
And Bob, you shared about the box of letters from Frances that you had after she passed away. What did you think about all of that? That all of a sudden this hidden child and hidden life in this box came to be. What was that like for you and for both of you together?
I thought it was about time. I thought it was time that he saw it all and talked about it all. And he started talking about it a lot. Maybe not to anybody else, but to me. And he was more interested in finding out more about it. And Imre was his cousin. He was a great source of information to us. I don't think we would have gotten this far without Imre.
Mhm.
He was with us on that trip to Europe.
How does this experience of taping today, you mentioned your children looking forward to it. Why do you think that is?
Because I think it's something that you know, it's easy. They're so busy, and it's easy for them to forget the details. And I think this will be a tangible record of his life, really.
And do you think it's good for both of you as well?
Absolutely.
Because
I want people to know how he began and what a wonderful life he's had despite all of this. I mean, if one thing had gone wrong, he wouldn't either be here or certainly wouldn't be with me. And we're just so blessed. Our life has been so blessed, I think, and happy. And he's a happy person, and I think it just shows a testament to him that after all this, he can be happy about so many things. And he just, I don't know, but he seems outwardly to just feel like, yeah, it happened to me, but look where I am. Look what I've done.
So Bobby mentioned the woman who kept you. Although it was for money, she did good, right? She saved you. Mrs. Dovathina, right?
Yeah, Joseph, Mrs. The woman that kept me.
So many, we shared, so many people helped keep you so that you're with us today.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, as they may watch this tape, or anyone else to know that you'd like to share about your family?
Just don't forget.
What are these pictures of?
Okay, on the left is my birth father, Wojtek Deutsch, and on the right is my mother, Gertrude Deutsch, née Trauner.
What are these pictures
Okay,
of?
these pictures are my birth parents' marriage in 1937, which I believe was in Nitra.
So what are these items?
Okay, this is an announcement of a concert being performed by Wojtek Deutsch. It looks like it was June 1936. Here's his name, Wojtek Deutsch. They added an A. And inside you can see, here's his full name, Wojtek Deutsch, singing an aria from Bizet's Carmen. And to the right is a picture of him as the cantor in the synagogue that he was, Neolog Synagogue in Nitra. Okay.
Tell us what this picture is.
All right, this is a family portrait taken in front of our place in Nitra, in front of our house. And holding me, I was maybe 3 to 5 months old, is Dr. Carl Benish. Next to him in the background is my father, Wojtek Deutsch. Then my grandmother, Adela. And then to her left would be my grandmother from Wojtek's side, his mother, and Wojtek's brother and sister-in-law, far right. This is apparently a part of an envelope which shows the name of Mrs. Joseph Dobratinova, which they put, interestingly, not Dobratina. And that's the address where she lived in Nitra, where I was hidden as a child. Okay, this is apparently the receipt that Mrs. Dobratina signed, where Ben and Adela gave her 500 Corona, or maybe it was 3,500 Corona, I'm not sure, but the figure was $500. That was the equivalent that was signed when she gave up the baby. This is the passport that was provided when I left the country to come to the United States, and it has my birth date. Interestingly, they have the June in Roman numerals. I guess that's the way they did it in Europe. My birth date, June 6, 1943. And then here is a picture that my cousin, okay, this is a sketch that was done by Imre Gansi. It looks 1946, and it appears that he copied it directly from my passport. Looks almost exactly the same. Okay, this is my airline ticket from KLM, saying Master or Deutsch, and that was when we left Amsterdam in December 31 and landed New Year's Eve, 1947, one day later. Okay, this is a picture of myself on it looks like it's probably Central Park, dated 1947, which means it was taken probably 2 to 3 months after I arrived, because it looks like the wintertime still. So it was probably between January and March of 47.
And how old were you?
I was 3.5. Okay, so this is a picture of Ben Trauner, probably taken in 1945 while he was in the army in Germany. This is a colorized photo of Ben and Frances Trauner, my parents, toasting me at my bar mitzvah, 1956. Okay, so this is a picture of Ben Trauner when he visited Europe, and it's taken in front of the apartment that I lived in Nitra, Slovakia, probably sometime in the 60s, 1960s. Okay, so this is a picture of my wife, Bobby, and I, taken in 1997, and again, it's in the front of the apartment that my parents lived in. Okay, this is a photo of the Neolog Synagogue that my father was the cantor in. Synagogue was built between 1908 and 1911. And this picture was taken when Bobby and I were visiting in 1997. Okay, this is a plaque in front of the synagogue that was actually on the synagogue, which translates to being in commemoration of the 6,000 Jews from Nitra that were killed during the Holocaust. Okay, this is a picture of Bobby and I, probably taken on a cruise ship, I would say about 20 years ago. And this is a photo of my children. On the left is Jamie, myself, Bobby, and on the right, Allison, taken, I would say, about 25 years ago.